run a company called My Ability Care and the Mindset Project, which looks at both mental health and the disability sector. So I'll just go through what's involved in today's episode. So the prayer and snack break is at 8 p.m. So for those who are sitting in this room, program finishes at 9 p.m. First half of the event will be the panel, and then the second half will be Q&A. Bathrooms for those that are on site are located outside the glass doors. Turn right and then left to get there. Before we start, just wanted to share this disclaimer. The opinions that are shared today represent those of the speakers and do not reflect ISRA's stance. This is a judgment-free space where we can share opinions and experiences freely. Speakers are not providing general advice or religious advice. They are here to speak to their experiences only. Okay. So what I'm going to do is get each speaker to individually introduce themselves. Just a little bit of brief background about, what your experience in this disability sector has been, and then we'll just go around in a circle.
Okay.
I'll start with you, Sister Nasibe.
Thank you. Selamünaleyküm everyone. My name is Nesibe Takımoğlu. I'm coming from Melbourne. I am a guest now here at Israel in Sydney. I've got 3 kids. My oldest one is 23, and he has autism and moderate to severe intellectual disability. And so I'm here as a carer today. My experience is basically based on my experience with my son as a carer. Also, because I was migrant in Australia at the time, quite new, I didn't have any family around me. I still don't have any relatives in Australia. So it was more of myself and my husband trying to navigate through the system and trying to find what are available, what are not. So in that sense, I at the time, I was going through some pretty hard time. So I'm quite willing to share anything that anyone asks on that, just to be able to help someone honestly if I can in any way. Because at the time, that's what I was struggling the most. I was trying to find people who are experienced, which was pretty hard at the time. So that's why I came here tonight, accepted the invitation, and thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you on board, and I always say this to a lot of people. Sometimes familiarity is such a good strength because you can sort of, through your experience, educate even though there are lots of experts in this field, but it's just that personal experience that people go through, they can share it to the larger audience. I always find that fascinating. So thank you for coming, and hopefully we get to have some really good discussions. And Sister Sarah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sarah. So the reason I'm here and how this relates to me, I am autistic, and not only am I trying to look after myself, 2 of my siblings, my younger brothers, are also autistic, so a lot of my time is spent trying to support them, but also trying to work things out for myself. And in my kind of, day job, I am finishing off my Bachelor of Social Work this year, and I'm also doing an internship in New South Wales Treasury within 3 teams, so COVID-19, Women's Economic Opportunities and Reconciliation. And that's about it from me. And I accepted the invitation because I've never publicly spoken about being autistic and Muslim, and I hadn't really disclosed my disability beforehand. So when the announcement for this event came out, a lot of people were in for a rude shock. So that's okay. And I'm very excited to be speaking about my experience, inshallah.
Amazing. It's courageous as well to talk about something that you've personally experienced. And Brother Bassett.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Bassett. I'm 29 years old now, and I suffer from a chronic skin condition, a genetic skin condition called epidermolysis bullosa, or EB for short. And my condition basically, it makes my skin, it causes my skin to be extremely fragile. And basically the proteins and the layer between the skin and the membrane, it's like it's faulty. So wounds break out, blisters break out, all these type of things would break out on my skin. And I've had this since birth, basically. So this means that from leg to, thankfully, not above the head, but beyond the entire body is almost full of wounds and blisters and things like that. It's worse on the legs. These are the oldest wounds that I have on the legs, and like these ones are just not like small blisters or wounds. These are like no skin at all there, and they've gone under the feet as well, which means that I can't walk anymore. That's the reason I'm on the wheelchair in the first place. But Alhamdulillah, it has over time been deteriorating in that sense, and I did manage to complete my degree in school and all that. I managed to finish an Islamic degree and a history degree with Macquarie, and I wanted to continue further studies and do a PhD and stuff like that, but my body was starting to take a toll, and I had to sort of prioritize there.
Lovely. I've actually had the pleasure of seeing Brother Bassett speak before, so it's lovely to have him on board with us on this panel. He's actually phenomenal. So let's just break it down what disability and actually means and what neurodiversity actually means. So according to the United Nations and the World Health Organization, a person with a disability may experience long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments. Such conditions include but are not limited to depression, anxiety, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism or a myriad of other conditions. Many experts believe that environmental factors such as negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation and buildings, and limited social support worsen people's outcomes in life. According to WHO, 1.3 billion people experience significant disability globally, and in Australia, nearly 20% of people have a disability. So what is neurodivergence? So according to Harvard Health, neurodivergence is an umbrella term that describes brain differences. This shows itself in how people learn, communicate, and behave differently than what is deemed to be typical. These neurological conditions include, but are not limited to, autism, ADHD,
Synesthesia.
Synesthesia.
Sorry, I wrote them.
These differences are not inherently bad, but merely illustrate how people's differing brain structures can cause people to think, learn, and behave differently. People without these conditions are referred to as neurotypical. So what is a carer in the context of disability? According to Carers New South Wales, carer is any individual, including family, who provides unpaid care and support to a family member or a friend who lives with a disability, mental illness, or has a chronic terminal illness. Across New South Wales alone, there are nearly 900,000 carers, which includes children as young as 8 years old, through to the elderly taking on caring responsibilities for a loved one. So I'm going to go around and just ask some of those questions. So these are just around your individual experiences of caring for someone who has a disability. So Sister Nasiba, in your experience, what have been the ups and downs in your relationship with religion and God because of your lived experiences with the disability or caring for someone who has a disability?
I should say it was definitely mostly quite a positive. It had a really positive impact. I could say that it escalated in terms of a lot of maturity, I guess, in terms of understanding spirituality, my relationship with God. In terms of strengthening it, it escalated it. I can say that definitely. Alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful for that. Obviously, like there were times, there were points where you would be more susceptible to the to going into that pit of questioning why is this happening to me, trying to find the answer. If you are not lost there, it's actually good. That's my experience, because asking why can take you to where you should be, right? So he was born when I was 25. I was a teacher at the time. And he was diagnosed when I was 28. So we are talking about 20s, quite young age. So at that time, and in the first 3 years before the diagnosis was the hardest, by the way, because when there's something wrong, but you don't know what's wrong, or you don't even know that something is wrong, because it's my first child, no one was around. I wasn't even sure. As a mom, I was feeling that something was not right, but I wasn't able to convince the people around me. So it took quite a lot of struggle. So that's the hardest part. That was the hardest part for me. Then diagnosis at the age of 28. So at those ages, really, for someone, you are young, you've got your career. I was doing my master's at the time, I was teaching. Young, had the language, was in a really good country, migrated to a really good country. So from that perspective, everything was going on well. I got married, a son. But then suddenly something like that comes up, and you realize that the things that you thought you had, like your abilities, your what you own about yourself, everything is so questionable at the time. So it's really hard, I believe, without an impact of something, most of the times, for someone to voluntarily go through that reflection period of understanding at that age, that, or from then on as well, in my 30s as well, to work that, oh no, I am so weak, really. I am very weak. To accept that, I think. It's very hard. You don't come across with that. You are strong, right? You can do anything you want. You've got so many plans for the future, and you've got all the resources that you need. And suddenly you are impacted with someone that tells on your face that, no, you can't do anything. So I always tell this story. Maybe this is the second time for some of the people, but I graduated I was the best at high school, then really good at university as well, with a really good degree. And I was a teacher then as well. So I always used to think, if you study hard enough, there is nothing that you can't do, right? And as a really good teacher, I can teach anything. As long as I put myself into it, I can try all the methods, and I can do everything, and I can teach. And if they don't learn, sorry to say that, but it's their mistake, right? They are not studying enough. Their parents are not doing enough at home. I never said that, obviously, but I had that deep down somewhere. But then it was so interesting, very ironical actually, that I wasn't able to teach my son to tell his name for years. For years. I remember, I clearly remember, we used to sit down with my husband and role play in front of him hundreds of times. What is your name? My name is Nesibe. What is your name? My name is Sadar. What is your name? To my son, and he would just repeat, what's your name? So he wasn't able to tell me his name. We did it that so many times, and I wasn't able to do that.
Yeah.
It was so in my face that, no, if Allah doesn't let you do something, and if Allah doesn't let your son learn something, you can't do anything about it, right? I think I came to realization of that at a very young age because of my experience with my son. It really humbles you in many ways. I went back to teaching again after many years because I had a bit of a break with caring responsibilities, and I studied again, and I went back to teaching again. Believe me, it changes so much. The way I perceive my students now, the way I see the diversity, the way I see the different levels of learning, it's so different, and it's so humbling in that sense as well. This is obviously professional side, but it came from my understanding of, at the end of the day, everything can be achieved or everything can be done if Allah lets you to do that. Otherwise, there is nothing that you can do. And this acceptance is also such a relief in a way, because it opens the doors of real tawakkul, right? The real submission as well. So I think that's the most important aspect of my experience of being a carer, being a mom to a child like that.
I'm gonna just divert a little bit. So sorry, I'll get to your question. I'm fascinated to know at what point, because I'm doing my PhD on compassion, and I want to understand at what point, when someone goes through a massive calamity, do they accept? Because it is probably the most difficult thing to do when you're hit with something so profound that your child is not going to be able to do the things that you imagined as a parent that they would do. You know, they may not be able to have a degree. They may not be able to go through, you know, university, get married, have children. So there's all of those obstacles. At what point did you get to a stage where you thought, you know what, I've accepted this as my reality?
I can't really pinpoint a direct point at a time, because I think it all happened gradually. I think I just woke up one day and realized that that's what I feel. But it took a lot of time, I should tell you, because at the beginning, it's not like losing someone, a loved one, when you have all the time, or now he's not there or she's not there, you get used to it. You have the diagnosis, and as soon as you get the diagnosis, you go into this this rush of trying to get the interventions, therapies, navigating the system, trying to see what's happening. So I was on an autopilot for a long time. I don't think I had the time to sit down and think that how am I gonna? Yeah, I didn't have that time, and I also guess I was kind of subconsciously suppressing that as well. But over the time, I am lucky that I had a really supportive husband, like, in terms of the relationship of trying to work out how it works. I think our discussions together, trying to pull out each other up, helped a lot. In those discussions, helped a lot. Interestingly, this is, I think, I also I studied counseling later. Also, I'm teaching psychology now. I'm a psychology teacher. So I realized later on that grief of, as you said, because it's not the grief of your son being diagnosed or how your life is going to be from now on, but you lost something because you had envisioned a life for yourself and your son, and you need to give that up, right? Yeah. This is letting go of all the dreams or whatever you had and embracing the new ones. This doesn't happen like that. No one should expect that. I think it takes time. It takes a lot of support from the people around you as well. But it definitely takes a lot of spiritual guidance too. That's why I believe I was involved in Isra at those times, not at the diagnosis period, but when he was in primary school. The Isra kind of institutions or communities, Muslim communities where you can go and get the guidance that you need, helps a lot. Yeah. Personally, my readings on the spiritual and religious resources, they helped a lot in acceptance and understanding, because it goes in hand in with your understanding and accepting that this life is temporary. If you can't accept that this life is temporary, it's hard to accept the other as well. Mm-hmm. So this is my experience. Accepting this life as temporary, there is life after this life, which is the real life that we are all getting prepared to, and everyone is getting prepared to this afterlife with different types of obstacles and tests and imtihan. This is my imtihan, and this is his imtihan as well. He is also being tested with me, right? He's not tested in terms of being a servanthood. He's guaranteed to go to Jannah. But he's also being tested with me. Am I going to be really a good parent to him as well? It's my challenge. I need to accept that this life is temporary. This life is only given as a preparation for something else. Once I accept that, the other acceptance came with that. For me, that's how it was. I don't know, everyone's experience would be different. But as I said, the more I focused on my spiritual aspect of acceptance, the other acceptance came with that, I guess. I didn't even realize the other was there, by the way. I didn't even realize that I was ignoring.
Lovely, thank you for that. So I'm going to go to you, Sarah, and because of your lived experience, I'm going to ask you the same question. So what have been sort of the ups and downs in your relationship with religion and God because of your lived experience with a disability?
Yeah, mine was kind of a different one to that. I guess when I was younger, so in the context of having an invisible disability, you don't really know until you're kind of told that. So, like, my childhood was like, why is this therapist talking to me and being nice? Like, is there a problem? And so I think that took, like, a process of learning. So one of the things that I was dealing with when I was younger was I don't understand why I can't make friends. I don't understand when I speak to someone, they're suddenly very upset, and I don't know what triggered that. Or I don't understand why I can't hide my facial expressions and people are still upset. I told them the truth and they're still upset at me. So I think with that was a very hard thing. And then so when I was younger, I had a scripture teacher who said, if you make dua, anything can happen. If you ask God for something, he'll give you anything. And as someone who took things incredibly literally and incredibly directly, I was making dua, asking God, like, why can't I make friends? Like, from the earliest age of, like, why can't this happen? And why am I finding people hard to understand? And why do my brothers experience this specific problem? Because they were experiencing a whole bunch of things as well. And that's not always something that's really clear to you. And until I got a bit older and in my teen years, that dua changed to, like, dear God, please get rid of this autism. I hate it so much. And I can't stand it. And I don't know why. Like, I don't know why I'm coming across all these problems with people and why I'm finding a bunch of these things hard. it effectively took years of therapy to kind of undo all that and to kind of understand that, like, there are really great gifts that I have that, like, that other people don't have, and there is something of value here that I can provide to other people that maybe that maybe someone else can't, in a way, because I have this experience. And I go back and forth with that. Like, I'll have days where it was absolutely, like, awful, or like something blew up in my face, so then it just like it gets me back into that like deep sadness. But then there are, I think, the days of like actually appreciating myself and appreciating all these great qualities. I think that's like becoming a lot like more frequent. But when I was younger, a lot of that was, God, please, if there is a cure, like send it to me, like that's all I want. And so that was a really hard thing. So yeah, so my experience was a bit complicated, but alhamdulillah, it's definitely improved. And definitely echoing Nesibe Hoja's sentiment of like, as that spirituality grew, my acceptance for all of that grew, and so did my like, I'm content with this is actually a great thing, there is something I can provide people with this, I can translate this into something. So yeah, so it went up and down basically. Yeah.
That's great. Brother Bassett, I'm going to ask you the same question. Would you like me to repeat it, or you remember?
So like when I remember when I was in primary, I remember vividly, like years 4, 5, I had this like sincere innocence, like just this innocence that I was raised like in a good religious family, so I went to an Islamic school for like a few years as well, so I had memorized like, you know, a lot of the short surahs up to a certain point and all that. So whenever I had moments of like where my feet, for example, would be extremely painful, and I'd be in the playground and I can't play cops and robbers or tag or whatever it is, and I'd be by myself, literally just sitting there. Sometimes I even have like they have the no hat, no play policy. I would deliberately not take my hat just so I could just be sitting there by myself and think. In those moments, in my innocence, I would just like literally go into myself, like just reading those short surahs that I knew.
Yeah.
From like what to how to Qul Wallahu, Qul A'udhu Birabbin Nas, just repeating it, and then within 20 minutes, and in my instant, within 20 minutes, I'd get like my feet pain would completely go away, like completely. It would just be answered completely, and it got to a point where it was like 1 + 1 = 2. It would work, like it was like a formula, like. And I'm not thinking, oh, this is a miracle or anything. I'm thinking, yeah, this is, you know, this is true. This is like this is my innocence. But then, you know, going into high school and stuff, you're trying to find yourself now. Now you're like actually starting to look into things and think more deeply, and your hormones and all these type of stuff. And like in that age of like 18 and all that, I actually got 2 strictures in my urethra, and like I had to have a suprapubic catheter, which means that like for life I've got like a permanent pipe into my bladder, and like that's like a thing for life. So then now I'm faced with questions of, on top of the skin condition, I've got this thing that's compounded onto it. What does this mean for my future? You know, you're a young boy, and like, especially at that age, it's like, you know, young man, you have all these dreams of a family, of this, of that. And then again, it's that thing of acceptance, like, so how do I deal with this now? And I started to really question, like, it's like, well, what is happening? Like, why me? Like, you see everyone else around you completely normal, completely fine, and you're just like, why me? And alhamdulillah, like, because I had the religious background, and well, not just that, but in that moment you start thinking to yourself, like, what's the purpose of life? What's the point of it? I'm going through so much pain, and like the pain is like, as well, it's like getting to a point, it's really difficult. But it's just like, what's the point? And in that moment you start looking, you start researching, you start looking, okay, let's look at all the faiths. Let's look at Christianity, Islam, Judaism, atheism, let's just look at all of it. And you start to go through it, and you do come to I came to the conclusion personally that Islam is just so much superior in every way, and I've got my own reasons and all of that I went through. But then on top of that, when you look into Islam and how it deals with people that are struggling and suffering and going through hardships, and then like I was overwhelmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. It floored me. I was so shocked by how, and it just came at once as well, because like when you're studying this, it just all comes at once. So it was like, for me, like, you know, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. No soul will burden with more than it can bear. Or you've got the hadith of the thorn prick, where Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that no one, any hardship, any struggle, any struggle that you have, even if it's like a thorn prick, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expiate your sins or remove your sins for it. Or that, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that do you think you will enter heaven without being put into trial, or without suffering through hardships? And then he tells Prophet in Surah Al-Baqarah, give glad tidings to the one who is patient, and to the one who, and in the moment of his calamity, he says, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." Like when you see these, and then now when I'm in my moments of pain, genuinely, like because you're in anguish, I start to think, Subhanallah, like I'm getting rewards for this. I'm getting blessings for this. I like it's to a thing where it's I'm no longer the one that's at a disadvantage. I look at other people now, and I start feeling worried for them, and I'm like, Alhamdulillah, like in the day of judgment, like yes, they have the ease and stuff now, but just for simply living, and that literally breathed life into me, because in that moment of despair, you're like, why me? What's happening? And now you feel that, oh, subhanAllah, I've got something to look forward to. Like with all my struggles and hardships, imagine the mountains of days if you remain patient, you remain firm, and you remain good. Imagine all of that.
Yeah.
And then your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like I grew up and all my uncles would tell me Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you, like, you know, He's chosen you. And I would always think, what does He mean choose? How did He choose me? But in those moments you feel like, yes, like out of all of creation, you feel like He handpicked you. He handpicked you to like he wants you at his side. And all you have to do is just remain patient and think. And when you know that no soul will be burdened with more than it can bear, when you know that, then it just makes things like, Alhamdulillah. I have people, friends and stuff coming to me, they're like, giving me all of their life's problems and complaints, and Alhamdulillah, and stuff like that. And I'm like, how am I happier than you? SubhanAllah, but yeah.
So I'm going to stay with you, Brother Bassett, and ask you the next question. So what are some of the negative encounters, and if you don't mind mentioning some positive ones that you've experienced?
Alhamdulillah, for me, because I think it's like a visible condition, I've seen the best in people. Like when they see me the way I am, the best of them comes out. Even if it's like a person that you know, like it's like not the best of person. When they see you, they're like an angel. So I've had I've had like literally the only negative memory that I have of like with my condition is that like I remember once in a masjid I was kicked out because the guy who was like, oh, your tires are dirty. I mean, I don't know, but I have had like amazing experiences where the masjid next to me, Masjid Noor, I go there and then it rains halfway as I'm there, and I feel like I'm not gonna go into this masjid with like, you know, with mud and stuff on the tires, and the brothers that were there were just like, no, you have to come in, you're not allowed to leave, come, get the towels and, you know, clean this up, and just no problem at all, don't worry about anything. And they were like so welcoming and so good. Even Isra, like I was going to do my honors, and at that time, I really had to prioritize my body, and I had to sort of drop the honors. But Isra was so accommodating. They were like, "Don't worry about due dates. Don't worry about anything that we can help you with. You've got no worries." And even when I do my exams or anything like that, they would actually send people to my house and supervise me in my exams, because it's much easier for me than coming here and doing the exams. Like, alhamdulillah, I've just had it in that way.
So I'm gonna stick to that, because I think sometimes it's really, and this is not to minimize people's experiences, but in my own professional experience, I have seen if you have a physical disability that's very physically obvious, people do display a whole heap of compassion. So I'm going to go to you, Sarah. How, in your experience, it's not physically obvious.
Yeah.
How has that been for you?
My experience wasn't really ideal, unfortunately, because you're right, because it's not physically obvious and people don't always assume there's something on top of that. So my very first very negative encounter was I was in class, and so when you're a neurodivergent, you might have people have something called a stim, which is like a very repetitive movement. Mine was a hand flap, so I can flap my hands. I'm very, very flappy. So for some people it can be really severe, like continuously butting their heads or like kicking something. For some people it's just a repetitive movement. So I was doing that in my class, and I was flapping. I think I was just happy about something, and the teacher called me up on it in front of everybody and said, Sarah, stop that, flapped back at me and made a funny face to make fun of me. This teacher, so that not only exacerbated the bullying I was already experiencing by other children, but that it was weird because like I went to you for help with this stuff and you're doing it back at me. The next thing that had happened was I was like 10 years old and just violently crying to a counselor. I can't make friends. I don't know why. People ask me to be honest and they are upset. I have no idea why that happened. And then like I'm like violently bawling and she basically looked at me and said, I don't understand why you're upset and why you cannot make friends. It's really not hard. I said, cool, I'm not going to therapy for a couple of years. And then the most kind of recent one in adulthood, I was about 19. And I think it was in the context of a discussion, but it felt relevant to kind of say, oh yes, like I'm autistic too, because it was in the context of a discussion. She wrote down the phone number for a sheikh and like said, he's a sheikh, like go for an exorcism basically. And then, so that back and forth with like positive experience and then, oh, like something really bad happened. And though all those three experiences, and I've brought them up deliberately, because I've had other ones where it's like, oh, vaccines cause autism, it's boring. But with the other three ones, it's like they were specifically done by women who are hijabi and who are Muslim. Now, I'm not saying that to say all Muslims are bad with this. What I'm saying is that it's particularly hurtful when it's your own people doing that to you. Because it's like, yeah, I identify with you as a Muslim. Also, my mum's a hijabi, so you look like my parent. And I identify with you ethnically. But it's like, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I don't understand why you're being so hurtful about something I can't necessarily control all the time. And that was a really hard thing to go through, and that took many years of dealing with before I could publicly speak about stuff like that. But in terms of positivity, in 2021 was like the first proper time outside of a counselling office, outside of my parents, where I decided I'm going to tell a group of my friends, who are all young Muslim women who are amazing in their own right, that I have this disability. And I was terrified. And I was like, guys, this is something awful. This might like ruin your world or something. Like I was very dramatic with it. And then I basically said, I'm autistic. And they were like, that's it? Oh, it's not even a bad thing. Anyway, so let's talk about something else. And like, I think that was like a really like positive experience. And that was my first proper like, wow, like this isn't a horrible thing. So yeah.
But it's interesting you say that, because the connotation you've given it is that, you know, Guy, when you were telling your friends that it's a really bad thing, I need to tell you. And that's probably because of the experience you had. It just invalidated the entire, you know, experience of you going through what it was that you were going through, and obviously trying to navigate your world in that space and in that time, which is always very difficult for people who have autism. And Sister Nasiba, what about yourself? So what has been some of the positive or the negative encounters you've had?
In terms of the negative encounters, they don't really happen recently now, but when he was young, because it's not something visible, like he looked very healthy, normal, typical. There is no physical disability. And with the Down syndromes, for example, you can work it out from the face, but there was nothing that suggests. It only looked from outside, and sorry, but this is how it is usually in a lot of Muslim communities, a child who is not educated properly, right? So it's all on me. Yeah. I am next to him, and I couldn't educate my son on a proper behavior. So up until the age of 9, 10, most of the encounters were because people were assuming that he's a normal, typical child, until either they work out or I had to explain most of the time. So I hated that all the time while dealing with his behavior, which is already stressful, turning and saying that, you know, he has autism. And then they would, what is autism? Then you need to explain, whatever. But especially after the age of 10, 11, 12, he's 23. He's a big guy, quite big, but he acts like a 3, 4 years old. So it's so obvious. I don't need to say anyone. And honestly, like once people realize, they are very accommodating everywhere. Yes, I do have sometimes something that doesn't feel right or something that disturbs me, but I don't really focus on that. But I think that happens to anyone in any parents or any relationships. When you are out there, people are sometimes, you would have people that are acting negatively, but honestly, I had a lot of very positive experiences as well. You can see that people want to help. Sometimes they don't know what to do, so they want to stay away. Sometimes they do know. But I'll just tell you one thing, that something really positive that still makes me smile. In Victoria, we had 2 years of lockdown, which was pretty tough on on the families, the ones that are caring, because even the parks were locked. I don't know if you know at
Yeah,
this stage. It
yeah.
was, I don't know. It sounds very funny now, but and my son's routine was obviously out. Both myself and my husband were working online all day. I have two other kids at home, so we had pretty tough times. Like honestly, it was. I think when I look at the 23 years of experience, that is a very uniquely hard time for us, for our family. At that time, we tried to create another routine in lockdown. So in one day, once my husband was taking him out to Coles, everywhere else was closed, and once I was taking him to 7-Eleven or the other way. So it was a routine. We would go, park at the same spot, go. He would buy the same things, come back. And one day we went to 7-Eleven. There was by the way, everyone is going to either 7-Eleven or Coles, so it's pretty crowded.
Yeah.
So it was really crowded inside. And he, for some reason, I don't know what happened, but he was triggered. So imagine a big guy, 20 years old, but acting like a toddler out of control in 7-Eleven in a crowded room. So I was going to buy coffee. I stopped not to buy coffee. I quickly paid what he bought, but it was crazy. I was about to cry. I just held his hand and I was taking him out. I was walking to my car. Someone called me, asked, hi, hello. And she was running back to me, a young girl in her ages of 20s, I think. She brought a coffee and a cupcake. And she gave them to me and she said, you are doing a great job. It must be really hard, but you are doing a great job. I heard this a lot from a lot of people, by the way. A lot of people say that, and I really appreciate it. You need to hear it. We are so weak, we need to hear that. However, on that day, I didn't realize that it was that obvious. It was obvious for him, but not for me. I thought I was holding it really well, but I wasn't, obviously. And the fact that she probably bought that for herself because it was right after I left the room, but the fact that she thought it, and then I realized it's this easy, really, sometimes, to change someone's day. It actually changed not only that day, for a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, of seeing that there are good people out there, they care about the others, but maybe they don't know what to do. So that's something that I remember from lockdown.
That's amazing, and that's such a nice experience because sometimes we lack, a lot of self-compassion, and we think, I've got it all together. But when other people notice that you're struggling and then they give you that little bit of, validation, I think that's always really nice, a nice experience. So I'll go to you, Sarah. What are some of the strengths that you associate with your experience of disability that people may not be aware of?
Oh, I mean, common theme here. I'm very direct. It's almost uncomfortable for people. Hey, there's that. I think there's a couple of them, and it's kind of taken me a while to kind of really recognize I do have these great strengths. I'm direct, very honest. I look at a problem, and I never know this because this is my head, but like my brain kind of working, but I seem to look at a problem and think of an idea, give it to people, and they're like amazed. They're like, oh my God, we never saw it like that. But I think, and that's, again, it's not something you're consciously thinking of when it's you in your body, in your head every day. And so it seems like I have a real knack for problem solving as well, which works quite well. And I have a very unique way of empathizing with people in a very particular way that I don't always necessarily understand, but it really shows when I'm kind of talking very deeply with a person, or when I did my placement, because I'm a social work student, I did my first placement at a hospital, and there was a lot of palliative care. So I was kind of chucked in a deep end a little bit, but I had a very interesting way of kind of connecting with a patient, connecting with a person. Like, it sucks that you're in this position, but what can we do to get you discharged and out living your life? And that has you need a very unique mind to be able to solve some of those issues that unfortunately suck most of the time. So that was an incredible thing that I'd kind of discovered about myself through that process. So yeah, those are kind of some of my unexpected talents. Strengths, shall we say. Yeah.
It is. It's amazing because I think people need to understand that when you have high functioning autism, for example, it is quite different in the way the brain functions and operates, and processes information is not the same as, you know, someone who'd be very typical. So it is.
Can I add one more strength?
Yeah,
I
please.
know an egregious amount about sea creatures in the ocean. That is my special interest. That's it.
As a talent, that's great. Okay, brother. What are some of the strengths that you associate with your experience of disability that people may not be aware of?
I think one thing is empathy. I think I've got just because of, you know, just of my own thing, I think I'm pretty empathetic in general, and take into consideration like a lot of things. I'm overly thinking in my mind, like trying to be considerate, but more than that, I think it's helped me just in general overcome, I think, most, if not any situation. And one of these situations that occurred was back in 2016 when my brother, who was 1 year older than me, passed away. He had the same condition that I did. And we basically grew up together, just being 1 year apart. We lived in the same room for our entire lives. And with his passing, as strange as it sounds, that was probably the happiest time of my life. Especially even in those moments of his passing. In those moments was when I was the most spiritually high as well, because seeing what he was sort of going through, that put me in a position where I was like, I was in tahajjud all the time. I was in this, I was extremely, really, I didn't care about anything in the world. Like, I was detached. I was, you know, on cloud nine, so to speak. And when that sort of experience happened with your brother passing, and you sort of know the reality of things, with Islam, with religion, you know the reality of things. And to me, it's not that he's gone and that's it. It's that he's gone to another country, and I'm going to see him. Just have patience, and I'll see you eventually. But I remember in the ICU, my whole family is breaking down in tears. And it sounds bad, but I was only, I was just sitting there like holding it together and not really being affected by it in that way. But yeah, just these certain attributes like patience and just like seeing the reality of what this world is. It's the acceptance, the temporal nature of it. We are travelers. We pitch our tents. We don't try to build mansions. We're in the desert, you know. So yeah.
That's a really nice way of looking at it as well. Absolutely. I'm going to go quickly to yourself, Sister Nasiba, because I know I'm conscious of time. What are some of the strengths that you associate with your experience of disability that people may not be aware of?
There's nothing that people are aware of, but I think compassion, I should say, definitely. I am a teacher. I'm teaching full time. I'm teaching both boys and girls in different campuses, boys campus and girls campus. And I can see, like, sometimes I join in the discussions of the teachers about the students, their behaviors. And I most of the times I don't say anything, but I feel like they are only kids and they're going to grow out of this. This is only a developmental stage. This is normal for the day. Just relax a bit, give them time. I feel that, I honestly feel that the compassion towards everyone in general, maybe, I don't know, but especially to young people, because I know that even with my special needs son who has severe intellectual disability, a lot of the problems that we had, that at the time I wouldn't be able to sleep, I wouldn't be able to function for some days because of that behavior. As a whole family, we would be quite dysfunctional at the time. They're old, we don't even remember. Sometimes my husband reminds me, do you remember when Ejman used to do it? I said, oh yeah, I remember. He used to break, whatever. Yeah. Right? So it's over, it is going. New ones are coming, but it is fine. We will deal with it when it comes. So it's the same with the children, with young people as well. I'm not saying that we should be excusing their, inexcusable behaviors, but accepting that this is only a part of their development, I think it's so important. And I think he taught me this in a way from the opposite side, but he still taught me that, like, in practice. I knew that in theory, but in practice as well. So I think compassion.
That's amazing. Yeah, compassion is great. Maybe I should talk to yourself for my PhD. All right, so I'm going to jump to the next segment, and this is more around community engagement and understanding of disability. So I'll stay with yourself, Sister Nasiba. What are some of the do's and don'ts when responding to someone disclosing their disability or caring responsibilities? What should should people do or don't do?
I can talk a lot about this. I don't want to go into a lot of details. Maybe in Q&A if there is any questions that
Sure there
comes in,
is.
honestly. But just know that, like, if someone is caring, I'll talk from the carer's perspective. So if someone is caring with someone who has a disability, who has I don't know about physical disability, but intellectual disability, they did their own research. They looked at a lot of websites, so they know the resources. I think the worst thing would be starting to give advices as soon as you start talking. That's something that I sometimes, even my compassion doesn't help me. I get really angry. You just learned about the condition. You heard it from a couple of TV shows or movies. Just because you know bits and pieces, because it can be quite overwhelming. It feels very judgmental in a way. But I understand. Like, I also know that people want to help, right? But helping doesn't mean giving advices. So I think the best thing would be to give people time to express themselves, because most of the times you just want to talk to someone. If you want to, by the way, you just want to explain what you are going through, a bit of a validation. That's hard, that must be hard. Or, is there anything I can do? Or, just observe, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it's easy to work out. If there is anything that you can do, you can work that out yourself. If not, ask, genuinely. Be genuine, be sincere, ask if there is anything you can do. Look, I don't know anything about this condition. I don't know what I should be doing, but can you tell me what I can do for you? That's as simple as that. That's enough. As if you know, and by the way, especially, this is a totally different topic, I know, but especially with intellectual disability and autism, if you know someone, that's a saying that if you know someone with autism, you know someone with autism. You don't know autism, because it's so different. My son has autism as well, but Sarah's is so different, like, because Sarah doesn't have intellectual disability. It's totally different. Even if there are other people with autism and intellectual disability, they are totally different than my son. So I don't claim to know. If you come now and say that my son has an autism, I'd like to sit and listen to you first, because I can't claim that I know your son's situation. My son is very different. My son is verbal, for example, right? Verbal, he's able to express himself with his words. So a lot of the people with autism wouldn't do that. So they would, honestly, what really makes it hard for me is that really good intentioned people, I don't have any doubt about that, but they tried something with their niece or family friend that worked with their kid, they would interfere and try and do something for Edgeman, which triggers him. I know as a mom that he shouldn't be asked that, or he shouldn't be shown that, or he shouldn't be told that at all. Suddenly he goes out of control, then I have to explain him or her not to do that, but also calm him down. It turns in, and then I can't be bothered, and I don't want to go into that place anymore. I don't know if it works. And that's how you start to isolate yourself. I know that they mean well. 99%, maybe 100% of the time, I don't have any doubt that people mean well, but just stop, think, and then ask, instead of giving advices or instead of interfering. That's my experience.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's so important that we educate our community around those things, because sometimes people don't know. Sometimes people think, if we're talking about in the context of Saleha, it's only 5 minutes, in the context of grief or anything like that, we have this expectation that I'm supposed to help you and give you all this advice, but that's not the case. The important thing is that, if I always say to people, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, because your presence is very much accepted by people. You don't need to go there and become an expert by watching 2 or 3 videos, and that doesn't give you that right to then interfere in somebody else's life. So I totally agree. I'm going to go to both of you really, really quickly, because she's given me 5 minutes. Sarah, so what are some of the do's and don'ts that people should do?
Okay, I'll give you one main one for each one. My main don't is, because parents do this a lot, and I find it incredibly demoralizing, don't ever say, oh, you're autistic, my child's autistic too, I hope they'll become like you. I find that, not to me, although it is, I think it's demoralizing, because, like, what if your child cannot do these things? But it's also like, your child might have all these talents that, like, I definitely do not have, but the fact that your benchmark is another person, which echoing Nesibe's point, you've met one autistic person, you've met that person. You haven't met every autistic in the world. So it's like this idea of like, this is the benchmark for success for my child, and if they don't meet it, I'm disappointed in that. I think that's not a fair thing to put on a very innocent person. And that's something that's always made me quite uncomfortable. It's like, what if they can't do that? And that's okay that they can't do it. Like, that's a very societal thing of like, you have to achieve these things to be a good person. I don't like that. So that's one thing I would advise. Just listen to that person and take it in. And if they want to ventilate something, you don't need to give unsolicited advice either. That's a good point. And then in terms of just do, like, ask questions if you're not sure. Because I keep saying, I'm very direct, but I keep saying it because it's a common problem in my life. But always don't hesitate to stop a person and ask them, what did you mean by that? What does this mean? Have you considered this from this perspective? I think that's more helpful than you're completely wrong, and then it's very unhelpful. Yeah, you kind of, it stops the discussion from happening. So, yeah, so ask clarifying questions. Don't compare anyone to anyone else, and because it also reinforces problems of like a self-esteem issues for that person. So that's my two main things.
That's true. Yourself.
Honestly, they laid out a lot, really well. For me, consideration, just being considerate in general, like if I'm going this one, like maybe move out of the way, or maybe move something knowing that I'm obviously not able to do so. But beyond that, I think these two handled the question really well. And a lot of that relates to me to like the advice thing. I can relate to that really well. And,
Just hit them with the chair.
Is the time, or can I ask one more question?
Maybe a break.
A break? All right. Okay, guys. It's time for a break. So I think that we have prayer time.
Yes, 10
And
minutes break.
10 minutes
Tea,
prayer,
coffee.
prayer time, and there's tea and coffee outside as well. There are a few questions that are coming through via online, and we'll open it to the floor as well. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask our panelists. I'm going to finish with the last question before we open it to the floor. I'll start with yourself, Sister Nasibe. Are religious spaces accessible enough to support disabled people's participation? If not, what needs to change?
From our experience, obviously, our one is different. He's not required to pray. He's not required to go pray 5 times a day, etc. So honestly, we are not taking him to mosques, and this is sad because he loves mosques.
Yeah.
He loves to go. He loves people. He loves everywhere there are people there.
Yeah.
But especially the noises that he make, and the fact that he keeps running in and screaming, and usually because he's very happy. By the way, it's laughing.
Yeah.
But it is very disturbing. So we don't take him to mosques during the prayer times. But sometimes when they are open in between the prayer times, we do. So I don't think I can really apply it. But if I not in terms of the religious institutions, but in terms of the religious communities. Maybe a bit more education and a bit more exposure, would be good.
Yeah. And what about yourself?
Yeah, I go back and forth on this one. I think to kind of like, because I've done a bit of research for this panel, and even out of genuine curiosity, like back in the Prophet's time, like one of the first converts to Islam was a blind man, was a disabled man. And there are various verses in the Quran that are dedicated to him. Unfortunately, I don't remember them off the top of my head, so I apologize. But, so there was that aspect to it. We had, back in the Prophet's time, we had effectively what was a Muslim NDIS, where he said, it is responsibility of the leaders of each state or area to know and identify who needs help and pay doctors' stipends. And credit to my friend who came up with that phrase. And like doctors dedicated stipends and wages, and made sure if people wanted to go to the mosque, they will be chauffeured to the mosque and taken into the mosque. If they wanted to do something, they were supported in that. If they wanted to participate in something, they were supported in that. And then the first psychiatric hospitals were developed and put together, and research was conducted by Muslim psychiatrists, doctors and things like that. So to go from that, where we'd dedicated and built all this knowledge around this area, to then kind of, we can leave people abandoned in a hospital and it's fine, or yeah, I'm scared of that person who's slightly behaving differently and I'm going to ignore them. Like, to go from that to like not even be willing to include someone who might be disabled in a Quran class, even though you know damn well that those agencies do have the resources to include that person. I find that incredibly confusing sometimes. Sometimes it's a matter of just asking a question, what can I do to help that person participate? Because the other thing, there's one more element to this, where a lot of our agencies are essentially Catholic. You got Anglican, you got Uniting Church, you got Australian Unity. They are done by the church, which is nothing wrong with that in terms of they do a good job, but also the amount of times, and the Catholic schools are better resourced in inclusive education, but the amount of times those schools have fed my brother bacon is like insanity, no matter how many times you tell them. So it's, yeah, and then a lot of people might disregard that and say, well, yeah, they have no religious obligations, but if you would be upset at your 5-year-old sister eating something like that, you would understand why we're upset about that. So, yeah, I essentially know, but I think, as Nasipa kind of said, more education, more exposure, just ask. Sometimes it's a matter of like, what can we do to help? I'm sorry we couldn't include him in this format, but what can we provide so that can happen?
Yeah.
Because for sure you have the resources, you're just not willing to expand on that because you think it's a niche when you just haven't asked enough people if this was a need. And it definitely is.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Bassett, do you think in your experience, I know you said before that you haven't had an experience where things were inaccessible, but have there been a moment where you felt that there wasn't a lot of services that were disability inclusive?
No, back to before, it was more that like in terms of people being bad to me. I haven't really had those type of things, but yeah, I have had a lot of experiences where the places wouldn't be accessible, and we'd have to improvise in a way to sort of get this into the masjid or something like that. That's definitely been there. So it would be ideal or nice if like all masajid have ramps and accessibility in that regard. Beyond that, I think like a lot of these like centers, Islamic centers or masjids or stuff, when they have their programs, if maybe they could make those also accessible online sometimes. So sometimes if someone like me who's not able to go there all the time, that would be something that would be very beneficial in terms of learning, gaining knowledge and all that. We can access those type of things. ISRA does a good job with these type of programs and stuff like that where it's all online. But yeah, if our masajid and centers and stuff like that could implement that, I think that would be very good. And also just with nursing homes and like hospitals and stuff like that. I know like a lot of mosques with like, for example, the Tablighi Jamaat and stuff that they would go and knock on doors and stuff like that. If maybe services like that, instead of doing that, maybe visiting certain nursing homes and hospitals and stuff just to see the people within the community, how they are keeping up with everything. I think that would be beneficial.
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
Only just late last year was there an actual Muslim chaplain put into Cumberland Hospital. There's never been a Muslim chaplain in there, in spite of a whole bunch of patients asking for a service like that. Never. They've just, like, nobody ever wants to go in those institutions. Only late last year was that a thing that actually happens, and there's a lot of Muslim patients that are left there. So, yeah, echoes your point.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to open it to the floor. So if there's anyone who has any questions, please feel free to ask the panelists. And then I have a few questions that's come up online we'll ask. Don't all shout at once.
That gentleman there had a question.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you so much for your sharing. Actually, all of you have been amazing, and I got so many insights tonight. And you know, in our life, we often got the blessings and take it for granted. But when we through the difficult times, and we just realize how grateful we are. I have a question, especially for Brother Basit. What keeps you motivated and excited to continuing the life, and especially not giving up? And the most important, keep grateful all the time. Thank you so much.
I might just repeat your question so for our online audience can hear. So the brother has asked, what keeps you motivated and gives you a sense of encouragement to continue with whatever with what you're experiencing?
I touched on this before, just in terms of being overwhelmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. I think that was something that was very, very important for me. I have found nothing that comes close to what Islam offers in terms of the balance between hope and fear. So that hope, which is what we can look forward to. And it's not, again, it doesn't mean that this is like some kind of death cult type of mentality where we wish to die. No, that's not the way it is. If anything, like in these moments of pain and suffering, you actually, it's like the same thing where we make dua. We don't make dua for being in, so, but in those moments, it's like you can really take a step back, and even though it's pain, you could say that, you know what, it's not going to be more than I can bear it, and I'm being rewarded for this, alhamdulillah. And then it's almost like you look forward to meeting your creator, and when you look forward to meeting your creator, we have our 5 times daily prayers where we reorient ourselves to God 5 times a day, giving that fikr and that thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 5 times a day. In my case, I'm thinking about God all the time. And when you think about all the time, like, that does have an influence. It's a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. And I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, and I think that acceptance, being grateful and all of that, it's hope.
That's amazing. Anyone else have any questions?
So this would be particularly for, I guess, all 3 of you, but I think I want Sarah's answer on this. So Sarah, you talked about when you first sort of told friends how that, you know, and they were accepting and, you know, they were like in the moment, yep, you know, that's fine, it's not a big deal, and you thought it was going to be a lot worse than what happened. I guess beyond that, I mean, you guys did touch on a community level what you expect do's and do nots. But I think in relationships, romantic or otherwise, or even family relationships, friendships, particularly, because these are closely forged relationships that you go forth and you actively choose to have those people in your lives. So I guess around that, what has been your experience in terms of what's been a great sort of way that people have friends, family, romantic relationships that have been really great, and then some not really great in terms of as examples of things to do and then things not to do?
Very deep question to think about. So yeah, there's a couple. Thank you for that question. In terms of, I guess, close friends, thankfully I haven't had negative experiences in terms of that, but I also know people that have had those types of experiences, so I can speak to that as well a little bit. I guess, like, I've heard someone who they told a close friend that they had schizophrenia, and then these were their needs, and then basically the other person responded, that's weird, my neighbor has that condition, but he doesn't need all that stuff like you do. That's an awful thing to say, don't do that. In terms of romantic relationships, that's not, like, that's a for me, I think it would be really important for someone to be okay with what my autism kind of comes with, especially if you're thinking about living in close quarters with someone, if you're thinking about starting a life with that person, it's really important to kind of go into it with a really open mind, because also everyone's going to come into any dynamic with a bunch of things, so it's good to kind of be open-minded to what each person brings to that. So that's been helpful, because thankfully I have had a positive experience with that, but I know a lot of people don't, or they may decide not to disclose until much later, when that's a lot harder to do, because my advice would be you're better off telling people earlier than later. That would be my best advice, but nobody is owed an answer. You don't have to tell people you don't want to as well. And yeah, just listen. It's not fodder for gossip, and just listen with an open heart and open mind. Just echoing what Nesibe and Basit have said, listen with an open heart and open mind. And that's it, yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that? No? Does that?
Yeah,
That's lovely. Anybody else have any questions?
I just wanted to use Brother Bassett's example, but direct the question to you, Nesbit. Brother Bassett's condition doesn't affect him from the neck up, and I just find that like it's kind of small but also extraordinary as well. Do you find like small mercies, like in the big struggles? Okay, this is something, I feel the mercy. I feel Allah's, like I need to notice this.
Of course, a lot of those, I do have, as a general understanding of his situation, I actually think that I am spared as a parent. I have 2 other kids, and for the other kids, I have the responsibility because they are typical. So I have the responsibility of raising them with Iman, helping them educate them, teaching them to pray 5 times a day with the akhlaq and everything, and also have them proper jobs and have the life and everything, right? But with him, he's basically, it is more like he's here for me, because he's only, like I always said it, he's only a guest from Jannah in my house. No one is guaranteed. If in this room, no one is guaranteed, because our Prophet Muhammad says that no, I can't even help my own daughter, right? I can't help my auntie, I can't help you, I can't help my daughter on that day. So no one is guaranteed except the kids like him or the people like him. He doesn't have a test. He's not sent to this world for a test. So I don't have to worry about his ahira. It's the other way. I actually think sometimes that, especially when I feel down in terms of my religion, in terms of my spirituality, I can't do enough, or I should do more, or these are my mistakes, or these are my sins, I tell myself that, but I have Ijmal. And inshallah, if I can be a good mother to him, because on that day he will have the intellectual capacity on that day, and if he holds my hand on that day, that's all I need. So this is a mercy itself. Honestly, this is not something that I am romanticizing. This is what keeps me going. I see him as a guest from Jannah at my home. And no one else has that. No one else has that. It's only him. So alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful for that. And I can, and then the reflection of that in the moments, obviously, like there are hardships and everything, but that's what keeps us going all the time, me, myself and my husband, alhamdulillah. Even my dad lives overseas in Turkey, and we haven't seen him for a long time. Even he says that Ejmal is going to save us. Even he hopes from Ejmal. Ejmal, don't forget us in the afterlife. And he doesn't even understand what he's saying.
Okay, whatever that means. Yeah.
Just on that as well, like something that I never realized, but growing up, like as a kid, because of the wounds, to stave off infections and things like that, I need to have baths that require bleach or vinegar and things like that, sometimes both of them together. And this is open wounds, that type of thing. And ever since I was a kid, till this day, every single bath I have, I take a bath every second day, I've never felt a single bit of pain from that water. In fact, if I don't have bleach or vinegar or salt in the water, I feel pain. And I never thought about this as a kid growing up, but then like when I got older and then I learned about vinegar and salt and the effects that has on the wound, I was like, subhanAllah, like what? Like just something so miraculous, but alhamdulillah, you know.
It's amazing. Is there anybody else that would like to ask questions? No? Okay. If you do, please feel free to ask as I ask the online questions. I'm going to ask this question to yourself. Somebody's asked online, I feel guilty not being able to fast or attend Friday mosques due to accessibility and mobility. What are things I can do to please Allah? And are there courses that disabled people can do online, such as physiology, mental enlightenment, things like that?
I'm going to be honest, this, with me, things like, now I'm not able to go to Friday prayers as well. I used to be able to go to them a lot, frequently, and the masjid is right next to my house as well. I'll be able to just go with this. But nowadays, I'm not really able to go to them anymore. As well, other stuff like personal worship, like things like tahajjud and things like that, have become very difficult for me from a physical sense. Even just like normal prayer, like I haven't felt what the sensation of prostrating is in like 15 years or maybe even more than that. Like now I pray predominantly lying down. And alhamdulillah for the hadith that, allows you to even take that into consideration. If you can't pray standing up, sit down, then lie down. But it's those things that affect me more than anything. Those things are the most painful things for me. Like, not being able to go to Friday prayers has been such a blow. And honestly, I don't know. I don't know what the answer, because this is one of the things where it's like I want to worship more, but I'm being affected in that way. Whereas other things, it's like you can't walk or you can't whatever. That's whatever. But if you can't now worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the optimal way, in the way that you want to, especially like with my condition, like my wounds pass odor, smell. I've got other problems and all that type of stuff. Like if you're not feeling clean and all that, like those type of stuff, when it affects your ibadah, is very difficult. That's been the most difficult thing for me to overcome.
Can I add to that? That's a
Yes.
very good point you raise. I think with COVID, the one good thing it kind of brought was like online, being able to attend things online. I mean, we literally have a camera right here that's like broadcasting us right now with I don't know how many people watching. So like that has become more like hybrid options in terms of work and lifestyle and events have kind of like translated across the board. Unfortunately, we haven't, in terms of like what I've seen with like the Muslim community and stuff, we haven't been as good as adopting that as we could, because we definitely could. Like the Friday prayers, I'm sure could be broadcasted for people to at least participate. Like I'm sure, like I know on the radio they have the Friday, they call it sohbets in Turkish, but the Friday sermons kind of thing that are broadcasted on the radio. Like I'm sure that could be broadcasted on a Zoom or a YouTube stream. Like it's not that particularly hard or anything like that. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised that we haven't really adopted that more widely, because I think, echoing what this person's saying and what you've even said, it's like there can be opportunities to do that, and we've seen that through COVID. So yeah, I'm not really sure we haven't done that long term, but I hope that can happen, inshallah, because it would be good.
Absolutely, accessibility.
In terms of, sorry, it's not. By the way, this is a physical disability, and obviously Brother Basit already is the one that should be answering. But when Brother Basit was talking about it, it directly reminded me of Ayyub alayhi salam's story, where it was at that point where he realized that he can't worship anymore because of those worms that are touching his heart and his tongue. Then he had this dua, Rabbi inni mastani ad-durru wa anta arhamur rahimin. I think knowing that prophets were tested on, particularly on this calamity or in this imtihan, should be maybe that can be something that comforts him. That whoever asked that question, that brother, sister, I don't know. Whoever that is being tested on Ayyub alayhi salam's imtihan test.
It is actually only in those moments, like where my ibadah is affected, where I do really, really relate to Ayyub alayhi salam, where it's like this calamity is affecting me, Ya Allah, you are the Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And it's in those moments where I just keep repeating that dua of Ayyub. That dua. Only in those moments as well, because that's when I feel like the most like, Ya Allah, help me. I really need your help.
I have another question, this one specifically for yourself, Sister Nasiba. It says, how would you rate the schools you worked for and your teacher colleagues in terms of understanding and supporting people with disability and neurodivergent?
The school that I am working specifically,
Just in general.
in general, I don't have a lot of experiences with a lot of schools, but I can't say that it's great. I can't say that. This is something that I'm teaching psychology. We have psychology in Victoria as a VC subject, as an HSC subject. And the study design has changed this year. They just introduced neurodiversity and autism into curriculum, into this new study design. So this is something that we are going to be teaching in a curriculum in psychology in Unit 1. So this is something very new. So even the teachers who are teaching that content, they weren't taught of that. So they will be learning all that. I know there are a lot of things happening, a lot of educational programs, but it takes a lot of time. I know, and we have to accept that. So this is this has to take. We need to accept that it takes time, but it also takes a lot of effort, right? So if we leave it to time, it won't come. We also need to put the effort. But just because we have done a couple of courses or we have individual learning plans in plan now in a structure. It doesn't mean that it's working, but we are working towards it. Teachers are going through a lot of professional developments on that. I know that myself. I went through some, and I know the other colleagues are doing that as well. But again, when it comes to the school setting, we need to accept, this is very unfortunate, that the whole system, unfortunately, does not provide to diversity. Not only for it's not only for neurodiversity, it's for all the other diversity as well. So there's so much to do. And as a teacher myself, and as my colleagues, we definitely are struggling with that.
And I always find it's a double-edged sword, because in the public health system you have people who have neurodiverse issues, and then you've got maybe coupled with mental health and maybe a physical disability, but you also have a lack of understanding of what cultural and linguistically diverse communities go through, irrespective of the disability. So there's for our communities, I think that's a double-edged sword as well within the public health system.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yes, but also we need to see the largest picture as well. The education system doesn't really let teachers in schools to be able to like the expectations from the schools is to prepare the students to VCE, to the schools. And I am working in a private school, independent school. So the parents that are sending their kids there, they do pay, and they expect the school to prepare their kids to VCE and get better 8-hour marks, etc. So when it is the major expectation, everything kind of works around it, which is sad. I'm not saying that this is the right thing, but the reality is this is how it is. So all the resources are mainly working on that. But yes, definitely there is a lot of improvement, but it doesn't mean that it's done. There are so many work that needs to be done in terms of education, in terms of the resources, in terms of the education faculties at universities are changing at the moment. But the teachers that are graduated from them, we graduated years ago, decades ago.
That's true.
So it takes a lot of time and effort to adapt to that as well.
Absolutely. I have one question, and I think we'll go through everyone individually. I'll start with yourself, Brother Bassett, how do we dispel the stigma our Kurd or Muslim communities associate with disability?
Again, coming from somebody who's got like a visible and physical type of disability, it's hard for me to really offer a valuable, strong response with regard to this. Honestly, I'm not sure. Okay. Maybe I think they can do a better job than
Thank you, brother.
Just being honest.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's honestly a good question and an incredibly hard one, because unfortunately, more often than not, the expectation is on that person who's already experiencing something incredibly hard to be sitting there and educating everybody else, who is sitting there confused, looking at you like you're speaking Spanish when you're speaking English. I guess my best advice for that, even though we're the ones that are experiencing that, we often don't have the vocabulary to be explaining specific things that we're experiencing that are very deep in your head, in your body. That again, even though it's not physically affecting us, it somehow physically affects us. I guess to that point, I think in a way it is safe to lean on your health professionals for that, your psychologists, your psychiatrists, anyone you're seeing in that sense. I was very pedantic with this. I had a notepad and I had questions, and I had very tired doctor appointments by the end of it because I had 1,000 things to ask. But that, in a way, really helped me in being able to explain things to people who may think of life in a more pragmatic, direct way. Like if I can't physically see that you have a problem, you don't have a problem. Well, no, and these are the things you haven't thought about in terms of what I experience. That's often really helpful. Sometimes practicing those explanations with people that you trust. It may not be your family, it can be your friends. It may not be your friends, it can be your family, whoever that is. I think practicing that and seeing if they get what you're saying, and then you can kind of translate that to other people. Like role playing for me was helpful in terms of learning my own skills, because when you're autistic, you're manually learning how to do things. You're manually learning that's what a sad face looks like, and that's what a happy face looks like. And people don't always appreciate that. So that can be helpful if you have at least a neurological condition. Role playing, that can be really helpful. So then that translates into real world. action. And unfortunately, at some point, you have to accept that people just won't change and won't accept certain things, and you have to be okay with that. And I think these days, politically, we kind of live on this thing where it's like, if this person doesn't agree with this specific point, I can't be their friend anymore. Unfortunately, there is that grey that we have to sit with as people from cult communities and as Muslims, where some people will just never budge on a certain topic. And I'm friends with people who still don't believe I have a disability, or like I have family members who outright like have said like, I don't believe you have a problem, I think this is an overdiagnosed thing, like you look fine, you just act a bit odd and you don't understand these things. But it's also like, yes, but you are still my family and I still have to have a level of respect for you going into this interaction. So there is an element of have to accept it, but also see if you can find a way to ask someone for help with that as well.
Would you say that younger people these days are improving in understanding and knowing how to interact with all of these better than the older generations?
Definitely. And even current workplaces, like there are dedicated like structures and dedicated like what do you call it, strategies to include disabled people in these spaces. Like my government internship, I told them right on the job interview, like this is what I have, but this is what I can offer you, and if you hire me, this is what I'm going to need. Like, and I think there is a dedicated thing of like, we want to include people because there's a real benefit to that. And especially in government, if you're making policy for people, you want that office to be diverse because you need different people's perspectives on that. Having said that, there is a bit of a resurgence of like people who are self-diagnosing, and I go back and forth on this because I understand, especially as an adult, it's, as far as I've heard, you're paying thousands of dollars to a psychiatrist if you want to get a diagnosis. Now, that's really hard, and not a lot of people have that. So I understand if you've sat and you've considered it and you're like, I think I have autism, but I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I believe that. That is one thing. I have found that there are a lot of people who maybe attach themselves to like one quirky like personality trait and run with it a little bit, which I grew up in 2004. Nobody wanted to be friends with me, and I doubt nobody in 2004 was ever going to self-diagnose themselves as autistic. Like, I've never seen someone self-diagnose themselves as Down syndrome. Like, I don't know. It's a very specific thing. So I go back and forth on this. So I think there is more of an acceptance, but I think people are overly attaching themselves to things without really a deep considered thought onto what that means for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Sister Nasiba, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Sorry.
Okay, anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? No one on the floor? I'm gonna ask one more
I
question.
think there's someone
Yes.
there.
Do you feel like the increased acceptance, even if it's not fully acceptance, is coming with actual change, or do you feel like it's superficial
Is that for me?
for everyone, for anyone?
Uh,
I think you're most qualified.
I've been the one talking the most, mate. I think it is because, again, even going back to that internship example, like I did tell them up front that this is a disability that I have, and they still, and if they'd said no and I was fully qualified, it was discrimination anyway. So really, they had no choice. But I guess in terms of the other stuff, it depends. I think the self-diagnosing thing, that's something that, again, for the reasons I expressed before, I go back and forth on. But I think it is coming with genuine change. I mean, the fact that government agencies, they have like it's not just we'll include this person because they're disabled. Like, they have like a dedicated strategy for each, like they have like dedicated strategy to including culturally, linguistically diverse people, for disabled people, for women, for, what was the other one? There was two more, it's escaped me. But like, so they have dedicated strategies to ensure that people are included because, like, as part of their public sector values, because we make decisions on behalf of the state or behalf of all these people, our workplace needs to reflect that. I know private entities have been a lot better at this, in investing in that. And even though some people would say, oh, that's really tokenistic to have a dedicated thing to that, these are also spaces where we've traditionally been shut out of. Like, we were never allowed in those spaces. Bureaucracy was all about like a white guy who knew another white guy who knew another white guy and kept getting jobs. So I think, some could argue it's tokenistic. I would argue if it means that people get these great opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten, I think that's still a success in itself, regardless. Like, if someone just gave to charity, but it's seen as a tokenistic donation, well, they still gave something to charity, and that money's going to be used for something good. That's the best example for that.
Okay, we have one last question. Anyone can answer this, but I'm going to throw it out. Mental health can be a disability. For example, depression can be debilitating to the point one cannot wake up, or anxiety or trauma, and has no motivation to do things. How does this play out with Islam and, for example, your daily prayers?
I don't know because I don't have that experience of someone who has that, so I can't really answer that question. Maybe as a mental health practitioner, maybe you can answer this question. Honestly,
Of
like
course,
I
can
would like
answer
to know
it.
as well because it's specifically stated depression. If it is a chronic depression, if it is a diagnosed mental health, the thing is like if it's something self-diagnosed, then it's a bit question mark. Anyone can say I'm depressed, I've got a depression. But if it's a pathologically diagnosed chronic depression, then it's obviously a totally different story. So.
And I usually say to anyone that's come to me, for example, for therapy, that if there is a diagnosis, because there's a misconception in mental health, and we still as a community have a lot of stigma and stereotypes attached to it. So if we have so you're sad and you're unable to tell your parents or anything like that, then it's like you're acting out or whatever. But in reality, if you are experiencing something like chronic depression and it's ongoing for a long period of time, I usually say you need to see someone. You can't have an expectation that your local masjid is going to give you the answers for something that's, literally out of their control. They are not trained in this space. They're not physicians, they're not psychologists, they may be, but from my experience, I've never seen one. So that should not be your first point of contact if you know that it's been a prolonged period of time. I mean, we diagnose people after 6 months of seeing us. It needs to be to that level. So if there is a person that's experiencing that and you're finding that it's affecting your religion, it's affecting your religious obligations, then by all means, you need to seek access. And that means seeing a psychologist or seeing a counselor or seeing a social worker. That should not be frowned upon. I feel we live in a society where we're so quick to label ourselves, but too afraid for a psychologist to label us. We're always Googling our symptoms and saying, oh yeah, I must have A, B, and C, but I'm not going to go and see a psychologist because then she's going to label me with something, with something different, and I don't want that label attached to me. That's our biggest problem. And I've worked in the disability sector for a very long time, and that's the one thing I've found as well, is that people don't want to go. And as parents, they will see those behavioral traits, they will see those inconsistencies in the milestones that the child does not meet, and they'll still won't go and see a psychologist or a pediatrician just to get a diagnosis. Or there's behavioral traits at school where the child is biting in kindergarten, for example. They're not part of a developmental milestone. So then they will still not go and see a psychologist because they're too afraid of the label. If my child gets labeled with autism or ADHD or anything else, what am I going to do? Because I want to raise a very typical child into this world, and neurotypical doesn't fit my expectations. But you said in the beginning, we have a set of ideas. We have as to how we want our children to be raised, what kind of a future we would like for them. And then here you have a child that doesn't meet those expectations. Now, of course, you're going to be afraid to go and get that diagnosed. But for an adult who's experiencing that over a period of time, I highly recommend seeing someone. Why not? It's for your own benefits, for your own mental health.
What you are saying actually is interesting because for me, when my son was diagnosed, I was relieved because it was so confusing before.
Yep.
Why would he act like that? Or why can't I teach him that? Or
Yep.
why isn't he like the other kids? What is wrong here? Or is
Yep.
there something wrong here?
Yep.
So the diagnosis was a great relief for me.
And there is a lot of lack of education. Like you guys have come to this space for a reason, for a purpose, right? The information that you've received from tonight is really a responsibility on you. Even Islam teaches us that its fundamental value is that you go and teach that to somebody else. You go and teach that knowledge to somebody else. Having that open discussion inside your own homes. that maybe is frowned upon or never spoken about. We're Muslims. We don't talk about mental health inside our households, right? we it's never a topic of discussion. So you have this knowledge now. Why not go and talk about it? Why not have those meaningful discussions inside your household with a sibling, with a cousin, with whoever it is? Once we start those those narratives, the chain of effects takes place really quickly, and people will get curious and want to educate themselves. But we can't just say, I'm going to learn a topic and just let it sit with me. We actually have a responsibility as Muslims to be able to then deliver that to other people, to educate them. It's not something bad that you're learning either. It's something, profound.
Can I add something to that? Not that I haven't already. But I think in terms of that specific question that this person asked, I don't think any of us would be in a good kind of place to be answering anything to do with fiqh. So we have no idea. I would effectively argue that we have no idea what Islam says about that specifically. But I guess in terms of even the broader, let's say, policy sense, or in the broader kind of context that we're in right at the moment, especially with the NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme, and how that's structured now, you can feasibly get funding to get support for that. So if that's something where it's really, really impacted you've seen a psychologist under the Medicare scheme, you can go and get ongoing support for that if that's something that you need. It's a bit hard to. There's a bit of bureaucracy attached to that, but it's certainly valid if you want to do that, echoing Nasreen's point. And then in terms of what you also brought up in terms of denial, that's incredibly poignant and something I've unfortunately seen a lot. I'd seen, just in a professional sense, I'd seen one family when their daughter was autistic, and as soon as they turned 18, they had plans to marry her off. Don't think she consented to that. And we had to sit the family down and say, and they were an ethnic Muslim family with no other understanding of that. And then we said, if you do this, we will call authorities on you if you do this. There are people that will sit and deny for many, many years, and then that denial gets ingrained into that poor child. There are families who will never tell their kids that they had autism or they had this certain disability or this certain condition, and they find out later through someone talking about it or someone approaching them unexpectedly, and it's absolutely earth-shattering. And echoing Nasreen's point, please just have that discussion with your children. Please openly have an open conversation with them. Start from an early age if you can, because it really alleviates a lot of pain and a lot of problems later down the line, and years of therapy. So just throwing that out there. But yeah, I think echoing Nasreen's point, and you never know, it could be someone in your class, it could be someone at your workplace with this sort of stuff. It's not a niche, this is too specific of a topic and doesn't affect us. Actually, it's all around you. You probably just don't know about it. So that's my advice.
Absolutely. Mental health is quite common, and unfortunately one of probably the biggest diseases in the world that's increasing rapidly since COVID-19. So, it's something that you're doing for your own benefit. And when we talk about developmental capabilities, we're talking about the brain development at age 3, 4, 5, which is the most crucial stages. Actually, when we talk about a child's development, we're talking about from conception to 1,000 days of life. If you look at neuropsychology, that's what we look at. The time that the child is conceived until the time the child is 5 years old, they're the developmental milestones that we focus on, because they're the most crucial stages where a child will learn attachment, where a child will learn to understand different, theories about life and who they are. The child will learn core beliefs, what it looks like. That's why the focus is those 1,000 days of life. But because we don't have the education in our community, it's really difficult to get parents to come on board and understand that. But I totally agree. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I think it's been phenomenal. I love the discussions with Brother Bassett. It's amazing. Sister Nasiba and Sarah, thank you so much for being part of the panel. And to everyone else who's online and here, it's been amazing talking about such an important topic. And I hope that we get to carry this outside of this forum as well. So thank you so much.
So just before you guys each go through, just wanted to thank everybody who participated. Brother Bassett, thank you so much for your insights into physical disability and spirituality. That was really insightful and helpful, I guess, on many levels. Sister Nasreen, thank you for doing such a wonderful job. I'm a big fan of your work, so it's been amazing hearing you talk.
I won't be a journalist, that's for sure. I can't give up to anybody's time.
You never know.
And Sister Nasiba, thank you so much for giving us insights about carers and how that affects. And the last thing I actually want to do is I want to thank Sarah, because Sarah has actually put this entire program together. From marketing, from the questions, getting in contact with everybody. Like there have been late nights where she's worked on this, and I know because I was called out of slumber to keep her company on Zoom.
Yeah.
But she has dedicated her heart and soul to this, and I'm very, very grateful that you have put a panel together for disability, especially in a space that doesn't care for it. And so thank you, and thank you for being so awesome.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you. Oh, thank you. That was so sentimental. Loved it. Thank you.